Good afternoon, everyone. You are very welcome to today's Universum webinar, Ireland's Most Attractive Employee Index 2022 Professionals. The panel will be delighted to receive any questions you may have. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your PC or laptop screen. If you are using an iPad, you will find this feature located at the top of your screen. Without further ado, I will now hand you over to Orla Moran, Irish Jobs General Manager. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us here today for the Most Attractive Employers Index for Professionals 2022. My name is Orla Moran and I'm the General Manager of irishjobs.ie. Hosting the event today are Steve Ward, Head of Employer Branding, and Rosemary Haughey, Employer Branding Consultant, both from Universum. Despite the cost of living squeeze and the energy crisis, the current recruitment environment remains very competitive. Low unemployment and record numbers of jobs means recruiters are having to work even harder to attract and retain talent. It's why we're here today to discuss the results of the companies that are doing great things in the employer branding space. What are they doing to win the battle for top talent? And how are they engaging their talent groups? In addition, Steve and Rosemary will share valuable insights and learnings to help shape your talent strategies now and into 2023. I hope you all enjoyed the event.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you for Orla's introduction there, and welcome to our latest Universum ranking release and update from this time round the professionals. So earlier in the year we've shared the students rankings, so if anybody wants to kind of learn a little bit more about those, please do shout out. But today we're going to focus on the professional research that we did today and some of the insights that come from that. So I'm going to go and share screen now, which let's hope this works nice and smoothly for everybody. Go. Just got to press a button. Usually the hard bit is finding your cursor once you're in there, basically. But hopefully that can now means you can see my screen. Does that look right to you, Rosemary?
Yep, that's good.
Good, that's right. So welcome also to Rosemary. I think if I just skip on to the next slide, actually, we can just introduce ourselves. Rosemary, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah. I'm Rosemary Haughey. I am kind of relatively new to Steve's team. I joined Universum about 6 months ago, and yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind to say the least. Just learning all about the data and all the things that Universum has to offer from an employer branding perspective. And yeah, I'm really excited about the event today. I think we have some really good news stories to tell people and addressing some of the challenges that people might have as well. So yeah, it should be good.
Spot on. Yeah. Thank you, Rosemary, and thanks for being a part of this. And Rosemary very much talks herself down there as being very kind of new, but she's very much well ensconced in our world now in employer branding in Ireland. And I'm Steve Ward. I head up employer branding solutions for Universum in UK and Ireland. So this is that's my role. Now, what we're going to walk through a little bit today is, like I say, the research, and we're going to look at some of the key trends. And I'm actually going to kick it off in a second with some of the key trends. But to set the scene as to what we have, what we're alluding to today, and some of the things that we're referencing, we are looking into a piece of research that was done this year that totaled 10,433 professionals across Ireland. That is professionals, people who sit in the workplace, who are between 16 and 66 years old and could work in any kind of role, and we'll categorize those as we go through the rankings a little bit later. There'll be certain sort of categorization, but so a really deep piece of research into Ireland. And when we do this research, we ask deep questions, really want to get under the skin of what are the reasons, what are the challenges they're facing in the workplace, whether it be looking for new roles, whether it be in the workplace that exists now, how comfortable are they in their career, what are the things they look for if they're considering a new employer, etc., etc. So lots and lots of deep data. But what we'll do today is just cover some of the surface of that. If anybody's got any questions, as per the pre-recorded piece at the start there, if there's any questions you want to ask, there's a Q&A section. Please, by all means, ask some questions during the course of that. What we will do is we'll answer those at the very end, if that's okay. We'll run through the program of content, and then at the end of the period, we will address some of those questions. The ones that we don't have time to answer, we'll drop a line separately to everyone to make sure that all of those questions were thoroughly answered and addressed. So let's look at one of the things that, let's look at this. When we identify, when we survey the people in Ireland, how do we identify an ideal employer? Because obviously what we're going to cover today is a series of most attractive employers. Now, how do we get to a most attractive employer? Well, as part of the survey, we will ask, let's say, for example, Joe, the engineer sitting in Limerick, in our survey states that he's an engineer. And we say, okay, great. So you're an engineer. So as part of the survey, we'll say, here's 120, 130 companies in Ireland who hire engineers of all sorts. Here's the list. Let us know, which ones do you recognize? And Joe will tick the ones he recognizes, and the ones he doesn't recognize, has no familiarity with the company at all, he'll just ignore. And this will tell us a little bit about the awareness of organization. Then we ask, of the ones that you recognize, all the other ones have now disappeared, which are the ones that you recognize would you consider working for? So which are the ones you think are an attractive employer that you would go, yeah, I'd consider working for them. I'd be interested in thinking about applying for them. And they'll tick the ones that are there, and they'll ignore the others. And that usually leaves us with between 22 and 25 companies on average left in the original list of 130. So that straight away tells you already some of the challenges of attracting talent. That a list of 130 companies can all of a sudden, by the time we've gone into a point where we're actually understanding this consideration of working there, it's right down to 20, 25 maybe on average. And then at that point, what we ask is, we want you to choose 5. What we want to work out is, what are your most ideal companies to work for, from the ones you've got left. And that third stage is where we start to collect the rankings. So all the accumulation of all the top 5 companies that are in people's responses will give us an order of the companies that are the most attractive, and obviously the ones that don't get selected so often are a little bit further down the ranking. So obviously the goal for our organizations is to be recognizable, to be in consideration, and then also to be chosen as an ideal employer. We also ask whether they intend to do anything about it, would they apply, etc., as well, as part of the questioning. But the key thing we're focusing on today is that third segment, which is who are the most ideal employers, in the way in which we ask our questions. So before we get on to some of the winners, we're going to break up some of the kind of the sort of top 20s that we're going to go through. We're going to break it up with just some of the interesting important bits of trends that we're seeing in the research as well. So the first one I want to look at is what I would probably call the big topic this year. And I'll show you why it's the big topic this year. And this is about the rising need for flexibility and balance. And what we mean by balance, we mean work-life balance. So to provide again a little bit of context around this, when we share, when we walk through what are you looking for from an employer, we present this matrix. It's called the 40 drivers of employer attractiveness. And because Universal does this all around the world, it's the most globally recognized measurement of employer branding out there in the marketplace. And by understanding different motivators, different things that drive people towards an employer, what these 40 drivers do, these are 40 elements that could be attractive to an organization. What we ask people to do is to rank them in order of what is most important to them when they select an employer, and they slot the ones at the top, the ones that are most that they'll be looking out for when they consider an employer, and the ones that they're not so fussed by kind of end up down the bottom. And again, when we collect 10,500 of those, as in the research, and put them in a line and amalgamate them together, then we get an overall listing of the ones that are the most important to Irish talent right now versus those that are maybe not considered as front and center in their thinking when they're choosing who their next employer might be. So what did this look like in 2022, and why did I draw so much attention on work-life balance and flexible working conditions? Well, there you can see this is a trend over the last 3 years as the ones that are the most attractive. So what we're seeing actually there in the list is 2022's 20 or so most attractive features when they look for an employer. And in the previous, on the right hand side, you can sort of see how that trend has evolved with some of those over the course of the years. And what you'll see there as well, of course, is that there's a lot of the time it's quite consistent. There's not huge amounts of change. In fact, if you look at the numbers of change in the 2020 to 2021 line towards the right hand side there, the numbers aren't great in movement. They're quite tight. It's quite close together. But what we saw this year is slightly more volatile movement. And this is representative of the research that we've done this year, is actually this is the year where we've identified the greatest amount of changes in behavior and talent, needs, desires, worries, concerns, and expectations from an employer. And what we see here, really rising towards the top, is encouraging work-life balance and flexible working conditions. And only salary stays ahead of these, and nobody's surprised by salary right now being the most important thing people look for in a company, but it was anyway, as you can see, for 3 years consecutively. But it's these things that have come to the top. So what I wanted to address very quickly here is, what do these mean? What do we mean by encouraging work-life balance? And what do we mean by flexible working conditions? Because in a word on their own, they can be considered in different kind of ways. But what I want to look at it is, how do we exhibit this through employer branding? So how do we tell stories? I think we're all aware that more of us as organizations now have really worked on this since the lockdowns and the COVID pandemic, in working out our balance, our flexibility. But often what we do is therefore relate that to remote working. And it isn't just about remote working. Remote working is merely one kind of maybe obvious tranche of that, but there is a lot more to think about. And I want to focus on 4 things very quickly to leave you with, to consider around how do we capture. If we're saying now that talent finds these things super important, what we as organizations should be now doing is thinking, okay, how do we address this? How do we make sure that we are attractive in these features? And these are the way I read work-life balance when we look at this, it's the respect of our personal life commitments in tune with our professional commitments. It's not as simple as time and splits in terms of, I want enough time to do my work as well as enough time to do my life and all that kind of. It's more about the respect of an organization for those differing commitments and the ability for us to be as effective a professional as we are a father or a mother or a wife or a husband or whatever else it is that captures our personal life. And so I believe it's a respect word. I don't think it's a functional divide. I think it's the way in which we as employers respect, and we certainly know this when in fact in Ireland we've just done some videos with some companies recently that tell stories about what it feels like to work for the organization, and the elements of content that really shine through very, very potently are when people talk about that respect they get from their employer when something in their personal life has to take over for a moment, or something needs to come that's more important, etc. And that understanding respect is super important in employer branding and telling stories that make people feel good about themselves working there. The second element I want to look is how this references inclusivity. There's an important factor here when we think about the balance and flexibility around the recognition and the respect of differences, of different life complexities, anxieties and family values. Rosemary and I were just anecdotally yesterday just talking about, for example, females, motherhood, things that maybe 20 years ago were sort of regarded as perfectly okay, are just not, a more acceptance now. More people have more understanding and more respect about the complexities of motherhood, the complexities of fatherhood, whatever else it might be, and all of these things. So I think there's an important inclusivity about understanding people's different needs, and that's also religious needs and things like that, things that affect people personally. So respecting differences is an important part of flexibility, I believe, as well. Providing energy to our lives through work, inspiration, support for bettering ourselves. I think when we think about work-life balance, and if you think of all of us, if we think about our lives, very often our work affects our life. Like if we have a bad day at the office, Often we take it out on our other half or our dog or our cat when we get home. And that's because one affects the other, and equally life affects work. So it's important, if we drive messages of positive energy, we communicate and identify in our organizations where positive energy takes over, it has a positive impact on our people and therefore positive impact on life. And I think that element about positive energy, the way we back people, the way we have each other's back, etc., is a real invigoration for both work and life together. And that's about the human relationships and the contacts we create as well. So I think that's another thing to consider in this. And then the final thing is the belief in your people, the empowerment and accountability. We're going to explore later something about a breakdown in trust between employers and employees that probably exists in society a lot as well. But a lot of flexible working conditions and a lot of things around flexibility are built around trusting and empowering our people to be accountable for what they're good at and what you employ them to do. And telling stories around that empowerment is really, really strong, that we believe in people to deliver their work, regardless of where they sit or what kind of background they have or whatever it might be. And I think that's an important part of this as well. So these are the stories I believe should come from this. I think as organizations, if we're going to hat tip to where the trends are going towards trying to address that need for greater work-life balance and flexibility with our employees, I think these are 4 areas that would be very good advice areas and very good areas to focus upon. So that's just something, that's the first subject matter I want to address. We'll come back to a couple more as we walk through, but let's move on to, come on, let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to some potential winners, really. So the first group we're going to look at is the people who work within business, commerce. So we're talking about finance, sales, marketing, etc., etc. So people who work in the business field, business professionals across Ireland. So let's look at the first grouping. We're going to break this down as we look our way through here, and I'll pose some questions to Rosemary in a second about her thoughts on some of this. But so in the top 20, so here we can see the companies who ranked from 20 through to 11 with business professionals in 2022. And we can see here, as I mentioned earlier, already we see signs of quite vigorous movements amongst the numbers. Companies going upwards. Aer Lingus, I mean, we saw this in the student rankings earlier in the year as well, how on the whole, hospitality, airline, travel related industry obviously back on the rise now as all of us start to get back on airplanes again and start traveling again. They've certainly gone in the right direction, as you can see, as of Johnson & Johnson and RTE. Some other companies have found a bit of a challenge there. We've a few companies you can see drifting backwards a little bit in this particular grouping. So let's have a little look into the top 10 and see who might have gone into that area. And so you can see here we've got good risers. LinkedIn had a good rise. OnPost, we added OnPost. Sometimes we have to evolve our list every year to try and address the fact that certain companies probably should be in it that weren't in it previously, and certain companies who year after year just don't get any votes, obviously gradually then drop out of the list. We added OnPost in the last kind of 18 months or so to our lists, and as you can see here, they've jumped straight in at number 7, which is really good, right, Rosemary? I think that's a really good news story.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we can also see Facebook Meta jumping up. Now, it's really interesting because over the last, I would say for 4 or 5 consecutive years, Facebook, or Meta as we now know it, but they still ask us to keep them as Facebook in the research, have gone backwards. And obviously their reputation has taken a really tough hit with all the Cambridge Analytica stuff and all the things that happened. One of the things we've noticed since their branding has changed to Meta, and the fact that they are also making lots and lots of changes in some of their approaches to the way in which they treat us as users. They've really evolved in their brand position and their respect, etc. And we're seeing it in their employer attractiveness rankings as well, which is cool. Any other things that jump out for you, or Rosemary, any thoughts on that before we go to the top 3?
No, not really. I think, yeah, as you said, Post is in there. They, it's not the last time we're going to see Post in the rankings today. I think it's great, that they, as like a public service business like that is doing so well, and they've come in immediately. We don't have anything to compare them to year on year at the minute, but I think, the fact that they've come in so strong there, I think is definitely something of note. It's brilliant.
It is, and actually it represents, as you might have seen in the press today, some of the stuff that's gone out around these rankings. It is mentioned how some of the public service organisations have actually done very well this year, which, as you can probably tell, I'm a British person. In the UK, the opposite has happened, whereas in Ireland, this is something that's come to the fore. In the UK, public sector has dropped back a little bit. So it's super interesting to see that difference in Ireland. So let's look at the top three. So in business, so who came third? In third, we have Apple, and you see they jumped 2 places as well. So as you can see, there's 1 or 2 companies that were near the top that have gone backwards, like Amazon. HSC actually dropped back a little bit in this particular segment. But Amazon have jumped up to number 2 and jump up to number 3. The government of Ireland, the civil service, is holding its position as number 2. So again, great representation for public services organization there from that one. But the number 1 company for business professionals is Google, and they hold on to it from last year. So well done to all at Google. In the background behind me is a number of Google buildings over Grand Canal Quay here. I don't think they're looking over my shoulder and having a look, but they've just won now. They've done it quite consistently over the last kind of years. I always say this every year, but I mean it. Google never stop. They never ever rest on their laurels. It's one of the characteristics of Google as a business. It's one of the characteristics of Google as an employer, and a way it thinks about the way in which it tells its stories as an organization. So great credit to Google for doing that. So well done to Google. So congratulations for being the number 1 business for business professionals. And just to look at some of the movers and shakers there, I guess over to you, Rosemary. What are the things that jump out to you, and maybe why some of these have done so well?
Yeah, well, it's the same as Post. Irish Rail is in there for the first time here. Again, not the last time we're going to see them. They've come in very strong at 32. Intel obviously up from 51 to 33. Dell up from 73 to 49, and then Aer Lingus, obviously, as you mentioned, the big jump kind of back into the top 20 for them, which I suppose would signify. We kind of saw the same thing earlier in the year with the Graduate Act, but that confidence towards working in the aviation industry kind of still coming back to the fore again. So yeah, some really good moves there from all those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Intel are one of those companies we've seen a lot from this year. I think we've had a very successful student period, and obviously it's certainly filtering across the talent groups. It's fair to say the work they're doing out in the talent market at the moment. So that's business. So let's move on to engineering, another really important industry in Ireland. What we're talking about here is more traditional engineering, so not technology engineering. So this isn't tech, this isn't developers on that side. We've got a separate one for that in a second. So again, let's look at the 20 to 11 spots here, and again in a similar theme, quite volatile. Quite all over the place, to be fair, this year. It's such, and again, can't stress enough how many differences of feeling there is in 2022, being that kind of first year back into a normal working environment in a weird sort of way. I think we're back to some degree of normality. Facebook, as I alluded to, big jump back in the right direction for Facebook, 12 places, so 26 last year, 14 this year. Abbott Pharmaceutical done really, really well as well. Big jump up 7 for them, and Irish Rail, Siemens have gone up in the right direction too, but Irish Rail, as Rosemary mentioned in that last piece, and we've also added to the survey this year, and as you can see, for good reason, because they amongst engineering professionals are absolutely right up there amongst the top employers. Again, we see a number of droppers. We see a number of organizations, very established organizations, taking a little bit of a hit. In fact, Amazon there we see dropping 5 places here. We also saw them drop 5 places, I think it was, in the business top 10 as well. So a little bit of a hit on Amazon this last year after consistently going up for years and years. So a bit of a tough one for those guys. If we look into the top 10 a little bit, there you go. You see, nobody has held their position between 10 and 4. Everybody has moved so far in the top 20. There's no fixed positions. Microsoft, big jump in the right direction. Tough year for Jacobs. We were celebrating with them last year, actually, how well they'd done in the rankings. But the competition is clearly rising so heavy in this area that you can see that companies like Apple going up, Stryker moving further up in the right direction as well, Boston Scientific. So companies really jumping in the right direction, stealing some of those places from some of the people who kind of held the top spots last year. There's a rarity. We see Google going backwards in this one. Engineering actually dropped back in from 4th to 5th, and ESB dropping from 3rd to 4th. Anything that catches your eye there, Rosemary, before we go to the top 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be said of all the rankings, obviously, it's really interesting to compare this year's to last year's, because last year's was somewhat of an anomaly, you know, especially what you said there about Amazon maybe taking a bit of a hit. I think if you're comparing that to last year, where everybody had such a high dependency on them, to a certain degree, everybody getting their parcels delivered every day. But yeah, no, overall, I think, you know, some good moves there, especially Boston Scientific coming up strong there as well, against what you said is an incredibly competitive.
It really is.
So yeah.
Yeah, it is. So let's have a look. Who's top 3? So number 3 is Johnson & Johnson in engineering. So a really good jump for them, up 3 places, 6 last year, 3 this year. So they're one of the organizations stealing a march in the market share of thinking for engineering professionals in Ireland. So well done to Johnson & Johnson for that. Company we know well in Ireland. And Intel, mentioning Intel, they've jumped 3 places from 5 to 2. So again, company making big waves in Ireland at the moment, and really developing the range of people they employ in Ireland. Big employer right now. So they're big jumps for those guys, and that's just where some of those people are losing some of their spaces. But in number 1 is Pfizer, which and it held the top last year, so well done to Pfizer. And they obviously, what's really interesting about this, and this is really, and this is great credit to Pfizer, because last year companies like Pfizer, it wasn't terribly surprising that in the period of the research period, Pfizer were very much the fore with the pandemic and the vaccinations, and all, therefore the greater profile that created for them, and obviously therefore the almost like the purpose element behind some of that, naturally increased their popularity. What we've noticed is, in many cases, is some of those companies that were very integral to that have drifted away a little bit in some of the rankings this year, certainly professional rankings being the later set of rankings. But not with this one. Pfizer have held their ground really well there, and obviously Johnson & Johnson, who are also heavily in that area, have also improved. So yeah, well done for Pfizer for holding that, keeping their brand alive during the course of this this process. So absolutely brilliant. So let's move on to some of the movers and shakers. What have we got here then, Rosemary?
Yeah, Activation Blizzard, obviously that's very big, from 100 up to 66. So whatever they're doing, we always see them pop up all over the place, don't we? Activation Blizzard.
We
so
do, yeah.
Right, they're obviously kind of at the forefront. But I suppose maybe the main one to call out here, they had an enormous jobs announcement earlier this year.
Yeah.
1,000 roles being brought to Kilkenny and Donegal. So great. They were, it was all over the news here, and it's great to see the investment, obviously. And it'll be really interesting to see now with that huge expansion, what effect that's going to have maybe this time next year. It'll be interesting to see how they compare. Deloitte, obviously a very big jump there too. They do very well. They did pretty well in the graduate rankings earlier in the year, and then Irish Rail again coming in very strong for their first year. So well done to them.
Absolutely. And just while we're on a minute, I've spotted there are a couple of questions that I won't leave to the end, because they're very integral to what we're kind of talking about. Lindsay Shanklin, hey Lindsay, how are you? Lindsay asked, sorry if I missed this, but the plus minus number on the ranking places, is it mean dropping 4 places on last year? Yes, it does. So the numbers that we showed in the pluses and the negatives are the reference to the comparative to last year. So happy to clarify that. And anonymous attendee, that's a well-known person, has written, how do you select the companies that get included in the full company list? Very, very happy to just address that now as well. Usually it's dictated by the companies who are probably either hiring the most or are most visible in a country to be able to identify who those organizations are. If a company tends to hire quite a lot in engineering, for example, we'll put them on the engineering list. If a company doesn't hire that many people in engineering year on year, then obviously they're not going to be quite so visible, not going to be quite so recognizable, so they don't tend to be in the list. Any organization, if you would like your company to be considered to be on next year's list, or not next year's now actually, because the bill period's already gone out, but if for future lists, please drop us a line and we'll happily, we'll put them in the pot for the consideration for the future ones, as we always do, and hence why companies like OnPost and Irish Rail are now in the list, is because of conversations where we realized we needed to add them into the equation to try and make sure that we're addressing and measuring the Irish market in the best possible way. Cool. All right, so now we're looking at a little bit of insights that I want to look, and we want to look, I just want to show you some things on remote working. So obviously, needless to say, this is quite a popular subject right now. I think in every organization, it includes our own, it includes everybody we ever talk to. One of the biggest kind of challenges right now is addressing remote working in the best possible way. And actually, and because there's no right or wrong answer, it's a really tough kind of area, but obviously it's something that as we alluded to earlier, it does link to that flexible working thing that we mentioned earlier. So therefore, people are looking out this now, and everybody who's on this call will absolutely know that this is a question that gets asked by talent a lot now, and they look for this and ask this question in interview, etc., etc. So I want to focus actually on the right-hand side rather than left-hand side of this. But so in our research, we ask, when we ask a question about remote working, and one of the things we ask about is actually what are the, as well as kind of like what are you looking for, what do you hope for, etc., etc. We also ask, what are the challenges of working remotely? What are the things that maybe concern you? And we put a few sort of statements, and these are on the right hand side here. Hopefully you can see them okay. Sorry, this is a snip, and the font is not the best kind of font for it. But what I want to focus first on is the fact that the grey line being last year's responses, the blue line being this year's responses. The first thing to notice is that these 4 especially are a demonstration that people are much, much more comfortable with working at home than they were a year or more bit ago, a year, 18 months ago. So really there's a greater comfort. So those 4 categories are, I'll be isolated and miss out on social connection with co-workers. That's dropped dramatically. Last year, it was 45% of people were still worried about that isolation piece. That's dropped to 35%. Still a decent number. It's still the biggest concern of all, but it's allaying. We're starting to deal with that a little bit, which is great. The other ones are, will be left out of important meetings. Another one is I'll be overextending myself. And another one will be onboarding into an organization remotely will not be as effective. Those 4 factors now are less of a worry to professionals than they were last year. So therefore, let's look at it the other way around. What are the things that people are more worried about this year than last year? And actually alludes to things around bias. 34% will be worried about bias towards people who spend more time in the office than them. We can see there last year that was 30% of that was a challenge, 34% this year. So we've seen a trend move toward greater uncertainty that actually, and this might be a factor of that now we've spent more time in remote working, we're more used to the environment. Whilst we're comfortable with some of the parameters of it, we're starting to see some of the effects of the difference between people working from home versus those working in the office. And this alludes to the fact that maybe people think, actually, if people are spending more time in the office, they're getting promoted and ahead of me, and they're getting, there's bias towards them rather than I. And the other one there, it's very related to it, is 22% will be concerned that their earning potential will be less if remote. And that's a little rise from last year. Not a big rise, but a little rise. And the thing about trends is to spot trends before they become big trends. Spot little trends before they become big trends. If you can address them before they become a big trend, then you're ahead of the marketplace. So it's only a small trend, but the two together are very, very related, and therefore absolutely something to focus and think about when we're communicating about our remote work stories. On a similar vein, we've heard this phrase, and love it, hate it, whatever you will around it. This phrase has come out about quiet quitting. For those of you who haven't really come across this, it was a bit of a trend that started with people doing TikTok videos of themselves doing absolutely all that they need to do, often working at home, and then absolutely clocking off when the time says it's on, and just saying, that's it, me done, I'm not doing anything more. And actually then therefore this rose this question around, actually, why are people feeling as though they need to express that they are doing absolutely the minimum requirements rather than the maximum requirement? Why are people not sticking their neck out, etc., etc.? So it's become a bit of a trend. Therefore, people have kind of said, well, why is this happening? And there's all sorts of narrative of it online, and mostly from people in recruitment and employer branding. We don't like the phrase. We don't like the fact that it's become a bit of a media phrase, but it is what it is, and there's a reason for it. There's no smoke without fire and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things we sort of looked at is, therefore, in our research, one of the things we ask for the professionals is, what is your interest in changing employers over the coming periods of time? Because then we could probably look at it. If people are quiet quitting, does this mean there is a high propensity to move? Because last year we were addressing the Great Resignation, and into the early part of this year, what are we addressing now? What's the biggest challenges now? So what I looked at is a 3-year trend in Ireland. And the first one shows is the response to the question, do I intend to move in the next 1 to 2 years? And you can see this is pretty consistent. So basically in 2020, 13% of people said, yes, I intend to move between 1 to 2 years. 2021, it was 14%, and this year it's 14% again. If we then draw back into yes, within a year, you can see that's also pretty consistent as well. 20%, 20%, and this year, 21%. But the one within 6 months, do I intend to move within the next 6 months, has dropped quite dramatically. 2 years ago it was 40%, last year 35%, and this year it's just 29%. It's still a big one. It's still a big portion of the people, but it's not as much of a challenge this year for people. Now, there might have been a number of reasons for that. Great Resignation last year, people moved into new roles this year, moved into their chosen professions. Therefore, actually, they're in a position of comfort and satisfaction by comparison in their role. Because we also saw in amongst our data that there was a rise in satisfaction employer this year as well. So again, all of this sort of goes against quiet quitting, because surely people are saying, actually, I don't want to move. Don't need to move. But there are bigger circumstances around us, not least the cost of living crisis. So therefore, people are not going to jump that quickly. They're not going to take a risk so much in 2022 than they would have done maybe in 2020, 2021. And as I alluded to earlier, maybe people have already made those career moves that have made a difference in their own feeling about their career and place. So therefore, is quiet quitting a load of rubbish? Is it actually that people are staying where they are? People are very comfortable staying where they are? I don't think it's quite as simple as that. And here's one other layer of our research that tells us a little bit more. And it's around, as I alluded to earlier, trust. And there are two of the questions that we ask, or two statements that we present to the professionals that we ask them to either agree with or don't agree with or whatever. The one on the left is, I trust my organization's vision. The one on the right is, I trust my leadership's vision. And you can see here where the trust is lowest is those people who are willing to move inside a year's time. And it's massively different. And so the difference between people who are prepared to hang around a little bit longer versus those who are saying they're prepared to hang around, who are prepared to probably move in the next year, is the divide is trust. And what's one of the most important factors of trust? Trust is transparency of communication and honesty and belief that we can have an open narrative, and my employer is going to trust me and I'm going to trust my employer. If the trust has broken down, regardless of what it says on the last page about the fact that people are saying, actually, no, I don't need to move. I'm quite comfortable where I am. It doesn't mean they're more engaged. It just means they're staying just where they are, just now, quite comfortable, because quite frankly, it's too much of a risk to leave. But it doesn't mean they're not looking for other roles or planning their next adventure, whatever. And that's something we need to be aware of, both from the HR people on the call who are probably thinking about retention, but also those people in recruitment and branding on the call who are thinking about attracting talent. The subliminal, they might not apply for jobs right now, but they'll definitely, in all cases, because they might not be ready to, might not feel right, but they might be doing the research, they might be thinking, they might be taking in the content. We know from our stats in social campaigns and stuff at the moment that there is a real propensity to look at job content, to look at career branding kind of content and imbibe it as part of a learning journey, as part of a and so I would encourage organizations to look at nurture journeys, look at branded content, look at the way in which you sometimes will plan our marketing campaigns over a 6-month period rather than a 1-month period, and thinking about how do we develop that. So something to look out for there. What we try to do there is kind of unpack this whole quiet quitting and uncertainty and disengagement and all that kind of stuff from inside the research, and try and give you a few signals, hopefully, of where that might be coming to the fore. So with that, we'll move on to the next category. We're going to jump into some tech insights in a second, but before we jump into the insights, let's look at who are the people winning in tech. As we know, I always Ireland is, everybody's a tech employer now. Nobody's not a tech employer anymore. It's we're all tech employers now, and in Ireland it's more competitive than ever. So it's every time Rosemary and I get on a call walking through companies' rankings with each other, everybody's looking for the tech, but it's so hard. You know, companies are to get into this top 20 is an incredible achievement. So I think anybody in this list should be applauded. But obviously we're going to find out how that all balances. Not least again because one of the things we see instantly once again is it's volatile as hell. Twitter really back in the game here. We see Irish Rail again. So good work for Irish Rail. Definitely a good employer all around. But we're seeing Twitter massive rise back up in the right direction. We're seeing others go backwards a little bit. Accenture going up, IBM jumping back into a good position, up to 12 by 7 places. So super interesting stuff there. And again, as you can see, 1 or 2 people dropping into the wrong direction over the course of this last year. But then when we look at the top 10, so a few changes and a few moves, but we can already see that the top 3 is going to change because 2 of the top there have are dropping backwards. So Intel keeping their journey up to 10th place, doing very well. Onpust, I mean, I kind of almost find it remarkable that in this tech sector that Onpust have jumped in at number 9 as a position, and I think this is a great representation of Onpust's positive brand in the marketplace without question. So really interesting to see them jump in there. Pfizer still going in the right direction, and for tech as well. When you're a great employer, even tech people want to work with you, even if you're not primarily known as a tech employer. HSA holding ground really well, as well as the civil service. Backwards for this one for Facebook, which is quite interesting given that engineering and business went up for Facebook. To drop backwards in tech shows how really competitive this area is, and Amazon dropping backwards as well. So let's go top 3. So in 3rd place, Apple, we saw them do this in business. They've jumped up 2 places in tech as well. So great credit to Apple, who always maintain super strong brand. Now, number 2. Now, every year, it feels like it's always the same when we do tech employers. But number 2 is Google. So Google last year and for every year in the history of man have been number 1, but have dropped to number 2 this year, which really tells you how dynamically competitive this area is. And the company that have jumped in the top place, in their place, are Microsoft. Microsoft in Ireland, so congrats to Microsoft for winning the number 1 employer for tech professionals in Ireland this year. And like I say, really good credit to them, because very rarely do we ever see Google fall off the top of a tech ranking. So this really is quite incredible. And now actually we saw it with Irish students this year with Intel jumping above Google, and now we also see it with the professionals in Ireland as well. Interestingly enough, we also saw it in Sweden with Spotify jumping ahead of Google as well this year, just looking, the wider world. So we've seen Google's strong position at the top is being challenged, and therefore it demonstrates that it isn't all one-way traffic when it comes to tech. Any other observations in that top 10 for you there, Rosemary, before we look at the movers and shakers?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like you said, on post is remarkable. I think that they've really been expanding into, their banking and insurance and things like that. So I wonder if it's more kind of financial tech people that are looking at on post now and thinking that's a real viable option for me. Obviously, I'm Garda Síochána and the Department of Education, they're a bit of a drop for them, but I wonder if that's nearly a restabilization because there was such a move. Like such an improvement in those two last year. I wonder if that's kind of similar to what it would have been in 2020 then, or before.
Yeah, because you're right. Some of those bigger companies, the tech companies, have risen again, haven't they, this year?
Exactly. Yeah.
You look at Twitter, IBM, Intel, and obviously the way that Microsoft have jumped up there, and Apple. I think you're right that it totally is almost like a recalibration.
Exactly.
To the way things were. So it shows us challenge. All of this shows us successes, but it also shows us the challenges of. Hence Lindsay's sad face earlier when Kerry dropped somewhere in the rankings in the questions that we saw. Tell us a little bit about movers and shakers, Rosemary.
Up from 31st to 21st. That's a very big jump for them. Bank of America as well. 84 up to 41 is enormous, huge. So well done to them. And then Stryker actually had a big jobs announcement there even in August. Hiring for 600 jobs in Cork. Which is fantastic. Again, I'm really interested now to keep track of that and see how they get on for next year and whether or not that moves the dial for them up or down. But pretty good moves there as well. I mean, any move at all within the tech category is impressive, but numbers like that are definitely stand out.
Absolutely spot on. Good. So on the subject of tech, let's look at a couple of interesting, some of the trends that we're seeing from Tech Town, given it's so integral to Ireland and so important to most people on this call and most people who we've seen in this kind of ranking. So I wanted to pull out some of the interesting things that we're seeing. So just trying to find some kind of highlights here, really. One of the things that's really interesting, given what we've just seen about the growth of large organizations, is that actually this year, probably against other markets, they're not completely driven by, there's actually been a backward step in a lure towards large organizations a little bit, which is kind of interesting. 2022 number has dropped from 50%. From 55, last year was a 55-45 split between large organizations versus small and medium size. It's actually balanced out a little bit as well there, which I think is kind of interesting. But one of the things that's a really interesting trend there down the bottom left-hand corner is there's less of what we found in the pandemic and during the course of the couple of years where the pandemic was happening, people stuck towards Irish companies a lot, Indigenous Irish companies, to almost like stay close to home. There's a lot more of a love and passion towards our homegrown kind of companies. That's this year, as I'm talking about, because there's a degree of back to normality that's happened this year. There is less lure towards Irish organizations than there were. There is still more lure towards Irish organizations. There's still 53% of the ground in terms of where the preferences are with tech talent, but you can see that split that was 60-40 last year has now gone to 53-47, much closer together. So a little bit of a thinking journey for Irish organizations to think about, right, how do we tell our stories better there to be able to engage talent. Just some interesting things in the top right-hand corner there. You can see people who rose in ranking or lower in ranking in terms of the industries that tech talent are interested by, because whilst we see their IT and engineering consulting is 20%, and obviously that makes always will make the biggest share of for tech talent. We can see retail growing, computer and network security growing, and hospital and healthcare growing. So really interesting, the industries that are moving up in their interest to tech talent, whereas education, finance and technology and banking drifting backwards, interesting enough overall. So that's fascinating. And then down the bottom right hand corner as well, you can see, whilst we get kind of hooked on the gig economy quite a lot in narrative and conversation. It's such a media phrase and all that kind of stuff, and tends to be overemphasized. It's still, in with tech talent, it is still 88% of people want to work in a full-time role, and freelance and gig work is still only 5% of the audience. So and I think that also reflects what we've been talking about regarding security, the cost of living crisis and all the financial challenges that we're finding at the moment. The need for a full-time employed role is very much on the rise. Interesting, looking at some of the behavioral in those top 40, in the 40 drivers, the ones that are seem to be jumping upwards this year, the ones that rose in the top 10 seem to be the things around flexibility, as we've mentioned earlier, but also money, as we've mentioned earlier. So given what we've discussed quite a little bit today, not a lot of surprise there. Flexibility, work-life balance and money, right in the eye line of people right now for obvious reasons. Interesting things that are decreasing are the medium-term kind of stuff, clear path for advancement, personal impact, training development, those kind of core kind of career factors effectively are almost falling in the nice to have category rather than the necessity category right now, as people think about their current situation and their security and their life around them and the things that they need. That means those sort of things are dropping a little bit. But one of the things that I find also very, very interesting as well on the rise, the ethical standards rising massively for tech talent. Look at that one went 11 places. That was the 22nd most attractive thing to look for in an employer last year. It is 11th this year. So again, spot the trends while they're happening. That's where you catch them before your competition. And also respect for people went upwards as well. And there's something there about respect and ethics, going back to the way in which I articulated flexible working and work-life balance earlier. I believe so much of it is just about the way we respect our people and about doing the right thing. How do we support our employees by respecting them and doing the right thing by them? This is very, very important messaging, and even more so to tech employees. Also looking at men versus women, as you can see here, on the left-hand side, the ones that are significantly more attractive to women than to men. On the right-hand side, the attributes that are significantly more attractive to men than women, and the ones down the middle are consistent amongst male and female tech talent. So hopefully there's some interesting things there. Some of it's a little bit what we expect. Women on the left-hand side showing greater interest in gender equality, ethical standards, purpose, etc. Much more like some of those heart-shaped kind of characteristics, very much, whereas men tending to be a little bit more in the sort of harder elements in some respects, but certainly areas around innovation and growth as well and things like that. But so rather more so than women. But if you're trying to get a consistent message that hits both male and female, products, career, leadership opportunities are there. But as you can see, none of them are really in the top 10. None of them are the most significant things. So that's really more a snippet of what goes into our super deeper data. But one of the things that really very much is different between male and female, and one of the saddest stories of this year, is this, and this is the gender pay gap in tech. This is us asking you, what is your current salary right now? And it's pretty stark. The 2 years ago, that gender gap was 9%. Last year, it jumped to 17%. This year, it's even wider at 19%. So the average tech employee in our research is getting paid lot male are getting paid far more than female. There are two ways to analyze that data. One, obviously everything is dependent on the roles of the person who completes the survey. So of course, there will be a number of people who are in the more supports, first line, whatever else might be roles, might be early in their career, versus people who might be in more senior roles, etc., etc. But that still dresses the lay of the land effectively about the fact that actually in all areas of talent, we should be trying to address this more equally. So really start this one. This is a real kind of bit of a headline maker, really, this one. It's something that we all need to look at in terms of the way in which we are trying to engage and communicate around our commitment to gender equality and equal opportunity, because it's clearly not improving in this tech kind of audience at all. So on that note, oh, there you go. There's my circle for around 19%. I forgot to circle earlier. So let's move on to our next section, which is natural science professionals. So let's go through some of the top 20 elements here. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see, again, like the others, quite a bit of movement this year, much more than in previous years. People like Apple and AbbVie going in the right direction, really good. Bristol Myers Squibb and Diageo hopping back up in the right direction after having maybe a couple of tougher years here, definitely back in the upward direction, whereas one or two drifting backwards a little bit, as we see there, but I won't want to highlight them too much out of kindness. Let's look into the top 10. Once again, nobody holding position. Everybody's going up and down. It's a moving market. Some really good moves, though, in the right direction. Irish Distillers, Boston Scientific jumping positively in the right direction. One or two others maybe having a tougher time. Anything that jumps out for you, Rosemary?
Yeah, just Boston Scientific again having a really strong year. Whatever they're doing, it appears to be working. And yeah, civil service, things like Department of Education, again, those kind of attributes more dropping down the list. But yeah, a lot of movement on this one. It always is. Natural sciences is always, for me personally, one of the more interesting ones, because it's not the huge big companies. It's more medium-sized ones, and it's fascinating, year on year to see who's making the big jumps and who's dropping.
Absolutely. So let's look at the top three. We can see one move there. Sorry, Lindsay. Kerry just dropped out of the top 3 into 4. So this means somebody has stolen a slot at the top there, and it's Johnson & Johnson who've stolen. So consistent with what we've seen and some of the other categories, Johnson & Johnson done really well this year in growing their appeal to talent in Ireland, which is fantastic. Well done. In number 2 position, Glanbia, so holding on to their spot from last year, which is great. So well done to Glanbia for doing that and staying there. And number 1 is our friends Pfizer again. So they once again, having done well, obviously we just saw in engineering earlier, also in the fields of sciences, naturally within amongst this group with life science professionals, etc. So of course, for sure, Pfizer, well done. Number 1 again, 2 number 1s this year for Pfizer, which is great. So well done to them. And if we move on to some of those mover and shakers, yeah, Rosemary, tell me more.
Yeah, I think obviously a huge one for Oracle. 107 up to 59 is a massive jump. So whatever they're doing, fair play to them. Salesforce, if you feel like Salesforce is everywhere these days, but they had a big jump as well from 67th up to 42nd. And then Medtronic, who again recently had a job announcement about a research and development facility in Galway. So yeah, big jump for them again this year from 40th up to 23rd. Hopefully maybe top 20 for them next year. We'll have to wait and see. But
the right momentum, isn't it?
Really big jumps there.
Brilliant stuff. Absolutely. And I'm going to move a slide on and then over to you. I'm going to give my voice a little bit of a rest and you can walk us through
no problem.
Health and medicine. We're just going to look at the top 10 in these final 2 categories.
We are, absolutely.
So there's your 10
top 10 for health and medicine. Novartis and Boston Scientific again, another fantastic moves for them. Google, a bit of a drop there. GSK a bit of a drop, and good to see civil service actually increasing there a little bit. So that's good news for them. And then in third place, we have VHI. Well done, VHI. That's great. And then in number 2 is Pfizer. And then again, I think at number 1, same as last year, is HSE, which is great. I think it's always good to see HSE at the top of one of these lists. And yeah, I know that it's always in the news about how that they need new recruits, and but it's always good to see that whatever they're doing is being reinforced as far as this list is concerned anyway. So that's good to see.
And then even Pfizer can't knock them off the top.
No, no, not yet. But yeah, some good strong moves for people there, and kind of a smaller category, I guess. It's more kind of niche. And then obviously law is niche again, kind of, but it's always good to see who comes in the top 3 and top 10 of these ones. Department of Education, a huge jump there, and also LinkedIn. HSE, a bit of a drop, and Department of Defense have dropped one. Apple and Amazon, the big multinationals, a big drop. So it's always interesting to see in these lists the kind of law firms, how they fare with the law professionals rather than the big multinationals. But obviously Facebook, Meta having a good year as far as law professionals are concerned. And then in number 3 is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And then in second position is Google, same as last year. And then number 1 is the Department of Justice and Equality. So the kind of state organizations there doing really well, attracting of the professional law professionals. So yeah, good moves there for a lot of people, but some challenges obviously.
Absolutely. And it's just sort of fascinating with Facebook and LinkedIn going around. I just wonder whether the kind of companies that have to have more lawsuits these days than other companies.
Well, maybe.
Therefore need to hire more lawyers, therefore need to
possibly.
Yeah, shouldn't say that really, but it's one of those considerations. I wonder if they've just been hiring more lawyers recently for whatever reason. But there you go.
Yeah.
But no, thank you for that, Rosemary. That's superb. And so we'll go to any questions in a second. So if you've got any questions to add, well, there's a couple that we're going to address here by the look of it. So in a second, just as a reminder who we are, because we didn't do it at the start, but we're doing it now. Where does this all come from? Universum is the world leading data-driven, insights-led employer branding agency. So we do full-scale employer branding activities, all the way from the talent insights on the left, all the way to putting inside people's mobile phones and career sites at the right-hand side, and all the strategic developments and stuff in the middle. It's all fueled by the insights. That's what we do. This is, obviously, you can tell today we're deep into understanding talent behaviors and understanding audiences in order to help us understand how should we communicate effectively, and removing the guesswork from all of this. So that, if you want to find out more of that, we know where we are. I'm going to come off screen share now, and then we'll address any questions that we might have. So over to you, Rosemary. Let me know if there's anything to address here.
Yeah, I think one of the questions we've had in just around, obviously, cost of living is very top of mind for everybody at the minute, and we see from the rankings that high future earnings and competitive benefits have gone up the ranks along with some of the other ones. How much do you think that cost of living crisis is going to influence people's decisions whenever they are going to new employers? And for those businesses that maybe can't afford the higher salaries, how do they make sure that they're still attracting the right talent and that they're still attractive to new talent?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question, a hard question, because I think we all know on this call that from an employer branding perspective, salary isn't really a thing we talk about. It's like, even though we've just seen in our rankings that obviously it's a very important factor in our in what people look for ultimately in an employer. We obviously naturally we don't create employer brand videos saying I earn 45,000 euros a year and therefore I'm happy with that. It doesn't work like that. So therefore the focus really has to be on the fact that for every organization, what employer branding and talent acquisition professionals can really control is the embedded salaries, salary structure of an organization. So What we therefore have to look at is what we can control. And the things that we can control, and I allude very much to a conversation I had with a company just last week who had this same challenge that said we pay less in the marketplace than our direct competitors for things like distribution talent and warehouse talent and people like that. And it kind of kills us. It's really, really hard to attract talent as a consequence. And so, and therefore I flipped and I said, well, how many employees work in this environment for you? And it was over 1,000. A lot of people worked in the region in those kind of particular distribution and fulfillment kind of roles. And so I said, let's flip this and try and work out, why do those people stay with you? Why do the people who work for your organization stay there, love working there, and not take €1 an hour more or 5,000 euros more down the road for the other employers that may give them potentially more salaries or are noted for giving higher salaries? And that's what we've got to focus on, because everybody makes a choice in life, regardless of cost of living crises and things like that. Those are important. We're all working out every day what are the things that are important for us to spend money on versus not. Now we've got our new gas bills and energy bills kind of going through the roof. But we still want to enjoy going to work every day. We still get it, going back to what we mentioned earlier about the invigoration of working with great people, working around great bosses and leaders, working around great working environments and people and organizations who support us. They might not always be able to support us financially. They maybe support us emotionally. Maybe they support us in benefits. Maybe they support us in colleague experience and all of those kind of things. And therefore, what we always have to do is balance those attributes that we looked at earlier between what are the things that we can talk about, what are the things that we can't really address. Every time we work with a company, we'll show them what the most important in their target group. These are the things that are the most important elements that employees are looking for right now, talent is looking for out there at the moment. All we can tell them back is the things that are true in your organization. You can't make stuff up. So you have to, so let's find out the things that you're true, that you're great at, that you can tell great stories about, and let's connect with those people with those great stories. And there'll still be a portion of people who kind of go, yeah, but they don't pay well enough, so it's not good enough for me. Fine, you can't control that. You're not going to be change that. But if you can tell a great story in a great magnetic way with something that really resonates with those people, then they might kind of go, oh, I know the salary is not as good, but you know what? That looks brilliant. And these are great people to work with. And I love the way they look this part after my family. And I love the way they do this and all that kind of stuff. So I guess that, it's quite a long answer, but obviously because it's not an easy one in a sense, it's quite it can't be solved in employer branding, but it certainly can be addressed in employer branding.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really good point. I mean, especially, I think you can't put a price on purpose if you're valued and things like that. Then yeah, I think those are also important along with financial supports. Just another one, obviously the gender pay gap was very stark in IT. Is that the same across the board? And kind of secondary to that, then, if there are people on the call or companies that are doing great work in the space of diversity and inclusion and gender equality, what are some of the more effective ways that they can communicate that to people so that if they are doing great things, that people know about it?
Yeah, and it is something, and I think certainly from an attraction perspective, if you are doing great things here and can exhibit it, not necessarily by showing people's pay sheets, but by stories, etc., then get up and do it, because you're probably going to beat the market straight away. Think about competitive advantage here. Sadly, so the answer to the first question, which was, is this across the board? Sadly, yes. It's absolutely across the board. It varies between, I think 7% was the tightest one, which I think is engineering, all the way to 19% for tech. Tech's the worst example, thank God, because anything more than 19 would have been bonkers. But it's a problem, right? Look, it's a real problem that needs addressing. I think we all know, I don't need to tell everybody that everybody's got a responsibility to try and make sure that as organizations we're addressing this, but often the people on the call here don't have that responsibility. Going back to the previous question really about, the pay, the people who are sat in this room often don't have the responsibility to make those core changes. So what you can do, if you're an organization that knows that you're absolutely addressing gender pay gap, male, female equality, etc., if you can demonstrate that, please do absolutely work out we'll happily help you because that's what we do, but work out like how do you best tell these stories in the most authentic way that could make the average female engineer or average female tech developer look at your organization, go, thank God, because I know that I get like 10,000 euros a year less here than I get than some of the guys, and I don't want that, and I fought and I'm not winning. I want to know I'll go to a place where they just go, don't worry, we've solved that, we've leveled the field, we've got appropriate pay for appropriate people. We know it's not an exact science. I think we all know that. I think there's a lot of legacy to try and still puncture and some history to puncture, but at the same time as well, it's I think I would just encourage people to look for the truths, the stories inside the organization, and do address that importance, but don't do it on its own, is one thing I'll add. So when we think about employer brand messaging, singular messages in isolation are fine to a degree, but look at our research and look at what female tech talent looked for. I'm using tech as an example now because, of course, we showed it a bit earlier. What we saw is the things that women in tech prefer specifically or quite particularly. And therefore, to go out with a campaign that says we pay the equal amount of people to females than men is quite blunt. It's quite black and white. It might work, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And therefore, I'd embed a feeling of greater parity of reward through other key stories that are relevant to women around ethics and I think if you're seen to be an ethical organization, the chances are that your gender pay structures, your fairness principles and policies inside the organization will be pretty strong. If companies don't see you as ethical, their assumption is that you don't have great care policies and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes one can imply the other, and as a package, you can tell a lovely story that absolutely addresses 2 or 3 factors in one hit, rather than focusing on one alone. And then that gives you a bit more of an environment response. Hopefully that answers that question. Okay.
Yes.
That's all good. And I think actually, thank you, Lindsay. You just said a lovely comment rather than saying a question, but it helps bring some things to life, and I've appreciated the learnings and highlighted today. Thank you. I'm very, very happy that we have, and that's what we hope to do. It's more than just rankings. Whilst we run a rankings event and all that kind of stuff, it's a bit I almost don't like as much, because I think you have to find so much more information about organizations underneath. And for anybody who's on the call who needs to try and understand a little bit more about the brand perception of their organization, how that competes in the marketplace, you know where to come to us. Please just drop us a line, and we'll explore where your organization is and where it kind of sits, and then obviously allow you then the opportunity to decide whether there's something else you can do about that as an organization. But I'll leave that in your hands to get in touch with us about that. And obviously, if you want a copy of the deck that's just been presented, drop us a line and we'll happily share that with you as well. Or we'll probably send it anyway, won't we, Rosemary, over the next day?
Yeah, I'll be in touch.
It'll go out in the next kind of maybe 24, 48 hours. So all good. So thanks, Rosemary, for your fabulous local insights. And
thank you.
And I'll say thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time, and look forward to catching up with some of you soon.